Chen James Hong, George Chen, Weihan David Wang, Veronica Weiss, Catherine Cooper, and Christopher Michaels Martinez.
Right now on your news channel live at 4, remembering the 6 victims of the 2014 Isla Vista massacre and those working to prevent tragedies like it from happening again. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Scott Hennessy.
And I'm Beth Farnsworth. Today marks 10 years since the tragedy of the Isla Vista massacre.
On May 23, 2014, Elliot Rodger went on a murderous rampage fueled by misogyny and hate. He stabbed and killed 3 UC Santa Barbara students in his apartment, then drove around Isla Vista, shooting and killing 3 other students and wounding more than a dozen others with his gun and his car before taking his own life.
In the decades since, many community members have turned the pain of that night into action, hoping to prevent anything like it from happening again. News Channel reporter Ivania Montes spoke to 2 former UCSB students who are still advocating for change.
I remember them texting me and calling me saying, "Jordan, I hear gunshots. What do I do?" And I told them, please come to my apartment down in Santa Barbara. Get out of Isla Vista as soon as possible. Just leave.
For Jordan Killebrew and Jonathan Aboud, May 23, 2014 remains a day that profoundly resonates with them.
I was a few hundred miles away driving down a dark road in Monterey County. I started getting frantic phone calls from lots of different people that I knew who lived all over Isla Vista who were hearing gunshots. It was a tough night because I was so far away from my friends and I felt helpless.
Killebrew was already an alumnus at the time, while Aboud was finishing his senior year and his last few days as the UCSB student body president. That night felt long for the 2 of them as they braced for the unknown.
It was hard to, there was no information coming out. There was very little information.
6 UC Santa Barbara students lost their lives that night. But from tragedy came a call to action to move forward, including Project Ivy Love.
The main reason for Project Isla Vista Love was to build something as a reminder to never let us get to that place. Never let us get to a place where there's so much misogyny, hate, vitriol, for a person to take the lives of others and themselves.
Project Ivy Love raised thousands of dollars to build the Isla Vista Love and Remembrance Garden.
And I'm just so grateful that we have an amazing community that saw, oh no, this is not what we're about. This is not who we are as a culture, and came together to heal.
In addition to these projects, legislation for gun violence restraining orders, also known as red flag laws, passed immediately following the tragedy. This provided law enforcement and families with temporary measures to remove firearms from people experiencing a mental health crisis.
We also have our own local government now that can work on public safety issues. And we have things like a interpersonal violence detective who works on stalking, sexual assault, domestic violence crimes.
10 years after the tragedy, Killebrew and Aboud say they continue to find ways to move forward.
Anytime we lose a life to gun violence, it's unnecessary. So it's on us. It's on us as a community. It's on us as individuals to hold our legislators accountable to make change. This can happen.
What Richard Martinez, the father of Christopher Ross Michaels Martinez, who was one of the victims, Richard had said at the first memorial in 2014, not one more person should die from gun violence in this country. And that resonated with me so much. It's the goal, is not one more person dying senselessly from gun violence.
In Isla Vista, I'm News Channel reporter Ivania Montes.
Richard Martinez attended today's remembrance ceremony in Isla Vista. His "Not One More" mantra remains a call for action among those pushing for gun control rights. I recently interviewed Martinez ahead of today's 10th commemoration of the Ivy killings. His only son, Christopher, was among the 6 victims that night. The 70-year-old Central Coast resident has become the face of grieving parents all across the country. He talked about the need for stronger gun laws and what he sees as an ominous subculture spreading across our country.
What would I say to him? What would I say to a young person who's decided to kill themselves? Because that's what it was. Isla Vista was a suicide. That kid decided, he gave up.
Coming up tonight at 6 o'clock, Richard Martinez talks more specifically about a rise in misogyny and incels. And he talks about the book he's writing, and it's not necessarily from a perspective that you might think. My special report tonight at 6 o'clock.
One of the first people to know the name of the killer in the Isla Vista tragedy couldn't tell anyone at first. Kelly Hoover was the spokesperson for the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office at the time. She says there was so much information swirling around in the immediate aftermath of the killings, but it took time to sort through it all and get answers to everyone's questions. It was a huge responsibility, and she had been with the office for less than a year. Hoover says her heart goes out to everyone affected that night.
I remember driving to Isla Vista and hearing all the ambulances that were rushing there, and it did change me forever. I think also being a mom and having students in college, you realize how hard it is. You finally get them to that point, and then to get a call like that or to have something happen to them when they're finally at their college experience is just hard to even imagine.
Hoover now works for the city of Goleta. She says ever since that day, she hugs her children a little tighter, knowing anything can happen. Tonight at 5 and 6, your news channel will have complete coverage of today's ceremonies honoring the victims of the 2014 tragedy and the people whose lives were forever changed that night. You can also find these stories and more on our mobile app and website at KEYT.com.
Right now on your news channel live at 6, honoring the lives lost in the Isla Vista killings 10 years ago tonight. We hear from survivors and first responders and take you out to today's emotional memorial. A quick trip to the convenience store turns into a close call. A Goleta 7-Eleven heavily damaged when a car comes crashing through. And cruising toward Memorial Day weekend with the return of the West Coast Customs Cruisin' Nationals. Your news channel live at 6 starts right now.
Live up and down the coast, from the beaches to the valleys, your news channel starts right now.
Chen James Hong, George Chen, Weihan David Wang, Veronica Weiss, Catherine Cooper, and Christopher Michaels Martinez.
Our top story at 6, remembering the 6 victims of the 2014 Isla Vista massacre and those working to prevent tragedies like it from happening again. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Beth Farnsworth. CJ is off tonight. We begin at 6 with a remembrance ceremony that brought the community back together today in Isla Vista, 10 years after 6 lives were lost. News Channel reporter John Palminteri joins us live. And John, this event also reflected the resilience of the community.
And we are back here at the top of the loop where there is a beautiful display of flowers. There were pictures here as well as the community of Isla Vista gathered for the speeches and music to remember those who lost their lives here in Isla Vista.
But there's nothing to cry about, for we'll hold each other soon in the blackest of rooms.
A remembrance ceremony 10 years after 6 students were killed and 14 were wounded in a stabbing and shooting rampage in Isla Vista. The community and family members came back together.
We hold in our hearts George Chen, Catherine Cooper, James Hong, Christopher Michaels Martinez, David Wang, and Veronica Weiss. We pause to honor the beautiful lives of the students we lost, forever keeping with us the joy and the light they brought to this world.
This morning I got up at 3 o'clock, drive all the way from San Jose to here, and of course remember my son.
As part of the continued community comfort was a reminder to speak openly about your feelings.
Don't be afraid to speak. Share whatever it is that you want to share, and know that it's okay and that we're comforting you.
This time together was also a time to shape a better community.
If it feels like it's too big, start local. If you feel like compelled to do something, start local, because it will grow and it can change.
We must hope, we must dream, we must live. We must learn from the past and do better. For them, for us, for those to come.
One of the areas where the community can come together and not only reflect on the tragedies, but think about some positive influences going forward, is in this special garden that was put together 10 years ago.
It's a heartwarming thing, yeah. And I would say it really helps the family, definitely. 10 years is a long, long time for ordinary people. I'm very touched to see the big crowd today.
For those who were here 10 years ago and see today's Isla Vista, they see a stronger bonding.
Let's carry on the spirit of let's be a community, let's come together, let's make things better, not in times of duress, but let's be preventative. Let's make sure that we continue to work together to make a better community. Hey, this is who we are as a community, and be more strategic on what this community needs, and that's what it makes it better. So,
the Isla Vista community that is out here today, and those who want to come into the area can come to what is called the Love and Remembrance Garden behind me. It's at the top of the loop, and there's flowers on each of the benches that represent the lives of those students that were lost. There will also be a paddle out in about an hour from now in the Isla Vista waters at 7 o'clock. Reporting live in Isla Vista this evening, I'm News Channel reporter John Palmentary.
All right, thank you so much, John. And we will have more on the Isla Vista tragedy in just a moment. But in the 10 years since the Isla Vista massacre, the debate over gun control and mental illness has only intensified. One man who knows that best is Richard Martinez, who we just heard from. He lost his only son, Christopher, that horrific night. He shares a powerful message as he sees an ominous subculture spreading across our country.
Shot fired, shot fired. And we have 30 down on the corner of Segovia and go north.
Live in Isla Vista on El Embarcadero.
3 ambulances here.
Multiple people injured. Multiple law enforcement agencies are out here.
Too many have died. We should say to ourselves, not one more.
Richard Martinez has become the face of grieving parents all across the country.
Not one more. Not one more.
His prominent role with Everytown for Gun Safety has connected him with countless survivors of gun violence.
I've heard thousands of stories at this point. It's been my job over the past several years to help them tell their stories.
We met with Martinez near his home on the Central Coast, the same one he's lived in for 30 years. During our interview, we also found out that he's been driving his late son's car, and he keeps Christopher's artwork close to his heart. Martinez is wary, though, about a growing mindset he sees among too many young men.
I've been thinking about what happened in Isla Vista and what's happened since. I'm less interested in the specifics of the Isla Vista shooter. I don't even name him. I read in a newspaper article that he's the patron saint of incels.
Men who are involuntarily celibate. Statistics show the majority of mass shooters are men or teenage boys, many who'd worked or spent time at the scene of the crime. Some of the killings were racially motivated. Other shooters, as we later learned, felt alienated or ostracized by society. Some had expressed feelings of inadequacy or repulsion in the eyes of women, as was the case with the 22-year-old Isla Vista killer.
Other killings here in our country and in other countries that have cited Isla Vista as inspiration. The Isla Vista killer put out a manifesto talking about his misogyny and retribution, wanting to kill young women. That's what he intended to do. He went to a sorority that night with the intention of killing young women, and when they wouldn't let him in, then he, shot the three young ladies outside the sorority, and then driving through town shooting, and that's when Chris was killed.
Martinez is convinced the IV gunman was on a suicide mission like many other mass shooters. He attributes growing gun violence to a subculture of incels and misogyny.
This idea that women owe you something and that men are superior to women, people who, for whatever reason, feel humiliated, that's often the driving emotion, and are seeking revenge.
Not one more! Not one more!
Not one more was Martinez's mantra since Chris died. So this dad is now on a mission to fill the void, to offer fatherly advice in the form of a book.
The first half of the book is if I was sitting with Chris and telling him about what happened in the weeks prior to his death, and what happened that night, and then what's happened since. Then the second half of the book is if I had a chance to talk to the killer before he began killing, what would I say to him? What would I say to a young person who's decided to kill themselves? Because that's what it was. Isla Vista was a suicide. That kid decided, he gave up.
In the 10 years following Christopher's death, Martinez is often seen standing among the growing throngs of law enforcement and grieving parents, mourning yet another mass shooting and suicide.
We haven't done enough to help our young people understand the ways in which the world has changed and help them find ways to operate. There are more guns than people right now in the United States. More guns in more places is not the answer to gun violence.
But Martinez says he sees small steps towards progress.
Stronger gun laws work. States that have stronger gun laws have less gun violence. In 2022, Congress passed a bipartisan Safer Communities Act. That was the first gun violence prevention legislation that passed Congress in 30 years.
And here at home, Martinez praises local mothers, making a difference for a whole new generation.
I worked in San Luis Obispo with the Moms Demand Action. You know, there's a really active Moms Demand Action chapter in Santa Barbara.
Martinez hopes that a fleeting wave of hatred is smothered by a parent's love for their child.
A reporter once asked me, would Chris be surprised at what you're doing? You know, my activism on gun violence. And I said no, because if the situation was reversed, he'd be doing the same thing.
And one of the first people to know the name of the killer in Isla Vista tragedy could not tell anybody. Kelly Hoover, she was the spokesperson for the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office at the time. She says there was so much information swirling around in the immediate aftermath of the killings, but it took time to sort through all of the information and to get answers to everybody's questions. It was a huge responsibility, and she had been with the office for less than a year. Hoover says that her heart goes out to everyone affected that night.
I remember driving to Isla Vista and hearing all the ambulances that were rushing there, and it did change me forever. I think also being a mom and having students in college, you realize how hard it is. You finally get them to that point, and then to get a call like that or to have something happen to them when they're finally at their college experience is just hard to even imagine.
Hoover now works for the city of Goleta, and she says ever since that day, she hugs her children a little tighter, knowing anything can happen. Stay with us, we'll be right back.